Hi, everybody. My name is Diego. I am the Program Director for Curriculum and File Development here at LAMDL. And in this video, we're going to be talking about some tips and pieces of advice I have for getting good at cross-examination. So I want to start off with 3 reminders about what cross-ex is and then things that it is not. So cross-ex is speech time. It is 3 minutes to poke holes in the logic of your opponent's arguments. It is time to establish credibility that carries over into your speeches. And it is a speech that judges pay attention to and do not ignore. Cross-ex is not prep time. So this should not be a time where you think it's 3 minutes where I get the option of asking questions and maybe I could use the time towards something else. It is not that. You should think of cross-ex as a speech time where during those 3 minutes, you are either trying to make sure that you respond to your opponent's questions with the utmost clarity and making sure that your arguments go through to the judge, or you should be focused on asking direct and pointed questions that poke holes in the logic of your opponent's arguments. You should understand cross-ex as a thing or as a speech that judges are going to not forget about, that they're going to remember. So therefore, it is not a speech that you should improvise through either. You should have some questions prepared, whether that means you're writing them down before the speech ends and you're ready to ask questions, or you have them written before the round even starts. It is also not an information seeking speech, but instead an argumentative one. Many people think that cross-ex is just like the other side asks questions to get some information. I argue that cross-ex is instead an argumentative speech where you are asking questions that sets up your arguments for your later speeches. It should not be a speech that feels dull or feels as though the speech happened and then nothing else comes of it. It should be something where the responses you get and the answers you give should be things that you can reference to help you win the round. So there's 2 main questions that I want to like separate in for cross-ex. There's 2 types of questions that I regularly see. One of them is not preferable. The other one is much more preferable. The first types of questions in cross-ex are clarification questions. Clarification questions ask the opponent to explain their argument or seek to verify if certain cards or arguments were read in the debate. So for example, why would climate change cause extinction? Did you read the 5th card in case? Both of these questions are bad questions because they either give your opponents extra speech time to explain their arguments to the judge, or it shows that you do not trust your flow at all. So, for example, if I'm out here asking, why would climate change cause extinction? The other opponent has just gotten free time to just extend their impact, extend why their impact matters to the judge. If I am asking my opponent, did you read the 5th card on case? It's telling the judge that I don't trust my flow and therefore I don't seem as organized. It impacts your credibility in the round. And so some easy solutions is if you're trying to poke holes into the impact of the argument, we can talk about formulating argumentative questions. If you are having trouble like understanding your flow or you don't trust your flow to the point where you have to ask if certain pieces of evidence were read on a specific piece of flow paper, then that's just an issue that you have to like resolve through practice. You got to practice your flowing. Um, the only caveat where I would suggest clarification questions be asked is only ask clarification questions when you have no idea what is going on, and it would help you to refute the argument later on. Sometimes you're going to be lost, and that's okay. But you should try to keep these moments to a minimum and only ask when it is absolutely necessary. If you have no idea what the argument is, or you have no idea what the opponent said in a particular speech, then you should ask them, what did you read? Or what did you mean by this? Those are the only times when clarification questions should be allowed. Instead, you should set up arguments within your questions and just like flow better to resolve any need for clarification questions. To set up argumentative questions, you want to identify key arguments you want to set up or loopholes in your opponent's logic and turn them into questions that set up these arguments to be later like argued in your actual speeches. So let's go over 2 examples. The first one is, why would green technology solve climate change? And this is against a different affirmative about icebreakers. So the first question is a clarification question. It's giving the affirmative in this case full reign to just talk about why their version of green technology is really good. You're giving the 1AC extra 1AC time, basically. Instead, you should set up an argumentative question that instead asks, for example, Trump has been rolling back environmental regulations. How do icebreakers or green tech overcome that? So you're setting up an all cause or a solvency deficit that's nested within this question that forces the affirmative to answer that before they can even get to solvency. The chances are is that the affirmative is going to fumble through their explanation, or they're going to give an explanation that is not based in evidence. In which either case, if they fumble through it, you can just say, that sounds really vague, and then move on. Or if they start bringing up arguments that are not based in their evidence, you should tell the judge that response was not based in their evidence. You shouldn't trust the word they say, and then move on to your next question. It sounds a bit like hostile, sounds a bit argumentative, but that's what you want in cross-ex. The second question, this is more relevant for deep sea mining, is why would deep sea mining be a reliable technology? Again, bad question. It allows the your opponent, in which this case it's the affirmative, to clarify their position and make their road to the win a lot easier for the judge to envision. Instead, you want to ask a question such as, past studies show that deep sea mining is an unreliable technology because it hasn't been able to access key Arctic regions. What about the plan is different? So again, before you get to that question about why is deep sea mining a reliable technology, I am setting up solvency deficits here that say that deep sea mining is unreliable in the past. What about the affirmative is fundamentally different to overcome those past obstacles? Again, chances are the affirmative will give you an answer that is not based on their evidence, or they will fumble through it, in whichever case it is, you can directly point that out to the judge and then move on to your next question. Okay, we're going to go over some do's and don'ts to cross-ex because that is basically all you need. Just remember to always prioritize setting up arguments first instead of trying to seek information from them. General piece of advice is that the other side is generally not going to give you the information you're seeking. So you would spend more time or more valuable time setting up your arguments than thinking you're going to get valuable information back from your opponents. Again, your opponents are trying to answer or defend as little as possible to win the round. They're trying to make sure they win the round. They're not going to give you the information you really want. So you should instead set up arguments that show to the judge that they are defending an incorrect position. With that being said, let's go over some do's and cross-ex. Do prioritize the most important questions. If you are not the one asking the questions, so if your partner is the main one asking the questions, you should integrate your partner's questions into your speech. So maybe you hear a smart argument being set up by your partner. You should mention that in your speech and directly say, my opponent asked this in my partner asked this in cross-ex, and this points to whatever argument you're trying to make through that question. You should pay attention to your opponent's questions and answers because they often reveal their go-to strategy. If you keep asking the affirmative about the potential downsides of deep sea mining and they keep explaining why their affirmative solves through this like one specific mechanism, there's a good chance that that is what is going to be in their 2AR. So pay attention to what your opponent's questions and answers are. And then do implicate bad responses. The moment you feel a bad response coming up, or the moment you feel a bad response was given, you want to make sure you highlight that across each part of your speeches so the judges know that their cross-ex response was binding. What I mean by cross-ex is binding is that if there's a bad response that contradicts what the other parts of their speeches are saying, cross-ex takes precedent. It's the moment where the opponent fully gave an honest answer and wasn't just relying on evidence. So you should implicate the bad responses because judges will always hold debaters to their responses in cross-ex. That is what makes cross-ex binding. You cannot escape your responses in cross-ex. Okay, don't so cross-ex. Do not interrupt your partner. I know that sometimes you may feel you have the correct answer, but there's a good chance both of you are on the same page. If you feel like you need to interrupt your partner, you should politely ask, hey, can I take this one? Second, do not cross-ex after the timer ends. In the same way we think of cross-ex as a speech, and the same way you wouldn't want the 1AC to give a 9-minute speech, like a minute over their reserved time, you do not want to cross-ex after the timer ends. The judge is not going to pay attention because it's no longer official speech time, and it just doesn't it looks like you're not managing your time correctly. Don't ask about dropped arguments. What I mean by dropped is it wasn't answered. If the argument you know that you want to go for has zero response by the other side, do not give them a chance to create a response. Just simply leave it alone. Do not be a dead horse. What I mean by that is if you know that you are crushing a specific part of cross-ex, you do not want to keep asking that question over and over again because one, the judge gets the point, And second, you don't want to give your opponents extra time to think about a specific response to potentially make against like a really good question you have. And then lastly, don't admit defeat. Sometimes you're going to be on the receiving end of a really bad cross-ex moment. You want to make sure that you cover up those holes. You can either do that by answering the question later on during the 3-minute speech of cross-ex, or you can directly address it in your speech by saying like, before my opponents bring it up, they're most likely going to tell you about this specific cross-ex moment. This is why we still win the round, or this is why their characterization of my response was incorrect. Something like that. Just don't admit defeat. Always find a way out. All right. Some speech by speech advice I have is cross-ex of the 1AC. The person who is the final negative speaker, so the 2N, should be the one asking questions. They in cross-ex of the 1AC, you should focus on solvency and internal links. So question the 1AC solvency mechanism, question how they get to their impact. That's really the only time you're going to get to like focus on that as the negative, because you most likely have other arguments you want to focus on. So now is the time in cross-ex of the 1AC to focus on questioning the 1AC solvency story and internal links to their impacts. If you're cross-exing the 1NC, the 1A speaker should be the one asking the questions, and your goal is to predict the 2NR. Figure out, based on their responses, which argument from the 1NC are they most comfortable explaining and why. The moment you figure that out, you'll be able to predict what the 2NR is most likely to be, and that helps you prepare your rebuttal speeches. It helps you prepare very early on what you need to focus on. If you are cross-sexing the 2AC, the 1N, so the first negative speaker, should be asking questions. The goal of this is to add 3 minutes to the 1NR. Given that you're the 1N speaker, you're going to be giving the 1NR in a couple speeches after the 2AC. Your goal is to set up arguments that help support your 1NR speech. So just like add 3 minutes to the 1NR. Remember, cross-ex is an argumentative speech, so you should be setting up your arguments for the 1NR speech. And lastly, if you are cross-exing 2NC, it means that the 2A is the one asking the questions, and your role is to create arguments for the 1AR and to dismantle 2NR options. By what I mean by creating arguments for the 1AR, it means that maybe there's these arguments that the 2NC and the 1NR might have that the 2AC wasn't able to get to. The 2A, the person asking the questions, wasn't able to get to. In that case, you should be using cross-ex time to create arguments that the 1AR can harp more on in the first affirmative rebuttal speech. And then dismantle 2NR options. If you're cross-exing the 2NC, it's sort of the similar role of cross-exing the 1NC. You're trying to figure out, based on the speech they just gave, what are their most important arguments from their own perception, and then figure that out as soon as you can so you can dismantle it during prep time. All right, on the flip side, let's say you're on the receiving end of a really good cross-ex moment from the other side. The most important thing to do when answering questions is reject the premise of the question. We know that a good argumentative question will set up arguments before asking a question. So you want to reject the premise first, and then you can move on to the second part. The second thing is reference evidence and arguments. So if you are the 1AC speaker and you're getting cross-exed about the 1AC, they're asking about solvency, make sure you are referencing 1AC evidence that explains what the solvency story is. It makes you seem more credible. It shows that you know your facts, you know what's going on in the round. And to the judge, it helps your credibility. And then third, only answer the question and nothing else. What I mean by that is that a lot of affirmative teams specifically will try to defend more than they really need to. All you need to do as the affirmative is defend that the plan is a good idea, nothing else. You don't need to defend anything about the United States federal government. You don't need to defend anything about like climate change in general. All you need to defend in the case of the Arctic topic is deep sea mining good and nothing else. Don't answer any questions that get you in trouble for no reason. And then, like I said before, if you get embarrassed, don't hide from it. Immediately answer it in your speech. Outside of cross-ex, in the same way that we do flowing drills, the same way we do speaking drills, you should be doing cross-ex drills as well. You should be practicing with your partner, because prepping is not just about cutting cards or doing speaking drills. It's also about being good at arguing the cards as well. I would practice cross-ex with your partner or with yourself. So ideally with your partner. just have a back and forth, pretend you're affirmative, and then get cross-exed on it. Or if you're the final negative speaker, get cross-exed on the negative positions and the arguments. It just helps you develop argumentation skills, and it helps you be good at cross-ex, which is something that not a lot of people practice for. um, but yeah, hopefully these tips and pieces of advice for cross-ex helped out, and good luck at the rest of your tournaments.